Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say. And in this video, I have some more stories of what could quite possibly be unknown cryptids or creatures. We have one from the Great North Woods, one that I think might be a dogman, and we have one from Colombia and one of the Passamaquoddy tribe. So, if that sounds like your cup of tea, then definitely pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. When I was younger, probably around 9, we were up in the mountains of Colombia. It was about 11 p.m. at night, and it was dark as hell, can't see anything. My mother and I were at a town visiting some family members, and the cabs stopped running at 10 p.m. My family insists for us to stay because it's a hassle walking up the mountain to my grandmother's house. My mom says it's cool, it's only a half an hour, we can walk. 15 minutes into our hike, I start feeling really cold. It's on a mountain, so it's not entirely weird for it to get cold at night. But then I hear someone sobbing. It's vague, but weird. I ask my mom what it is, and her face turns pale. I'm just a kid at the time, but I know something is up. Slowly, the sobbing turns into intense screaming, like a woman just crying her eyes out. The crying keeps getting closer and closer. I ask my mom what's happening, and she tells me to just ignore it. The crying eventually sounds like it's so close, as if it's right next to my ear. At this point, I'm like, Mom, what the hell? Do you know something I don't? She says, whatever I do, just keep looking forward. Don't look back and ignore it. And I say, even if I want to look around, it's so dark I can't see my hand in front of my face. My mom has a flashlight though, and we're about 5 minutes from arriving at our destination. The crying is so intense at this point that it's starting to make me feel sad. We meet up with some people on the trail, and they greet us as if nothing is happening. And I'm like, do you not hear this scream? Like, what's going on? My mom doesn't bring it up. They don't bring it up, but they look just as pale and scared as my mom. Finally, we get home. I asked my grandma if she heard the crying. Her face looks surprised. She asked my mom what I was talking about. It turns out that there's a thing that haunts the mountains, that it just cries all the time. It's supposedly a her, and when you hear her, you can't look back. You always have to look forward, or she'll come for you. Now, me being a dumb kid, I did look back, and the rest of the time there, every night, I heard the crying and screaming right outside my window. This happened when I was 17 years old. I went over to my friend's house, and he lives pretty deep in the woods, pretty isolated. His parents were away for the weekend, and while hanging out, he says, "Hey, let's go for a walk in the woods." And I think, why not? So we're walking through the woods, and it's 2 a.m. and very cold. Like, seriously cold. The ground had frost all over it. And my friend, having no concept of being quiet in the woods, is being noisy as hell as usual. And then I hear something to our left. He hears it too. He says, "Must be a deer. You should stop being so jumpy." But then he stops, completely silent. While looking over to my left, I run into him, and I say, "What the hell, man? Warn somebody when you're going to stop." I see what he's looking at, and my blood runs cold. This thing resembles, I don't know, a huge coyote with long arms and huge fingers. It's sitting there digging at an 8-point deer. There's blood everywhere. It looks at us and lets out this horrid growl. The hairs on my everything stand up on end. My friend turns and runs and says, "Get back to the house." And I say back, "What did you expect me to do, fight it?" I make a break for it. I'm just behind him. I look back. It's chasing us. But it doesn't look like it's putting in any effort. It looks very relaxed, like it's going for a leisurely run through the forest. We see the house. The thing is gone all of a sudden, disappeared. We get inside, we lock the door, and we sit down. We can now hear it strutting around. I look outside through the blinds, and it's facing the house, standing up on its hind legs, and it's walking around, almost like it's pacing. I turn away, and we sit there for a while and just listen. While we're sitting there, whispering about what we just saw, I'm just whispering, he is kind of freaking out. I look outside again. It's gone again. We relax a bit after a few minutes. He calms down, and as we're trying to figure out what we saw, we suddenly hear this loud scratch, like knives against the side of the house. My friend starts flipping out again. I tell him to shut the hell up. We move to the other side of the house where the scratching's coming from, and it's a double-wide trailer, so it's not very big. It took us about a second to move to the other side of the house. We see it outside. It's walking near the window. It's showing its teeth, like a snarling dog. My friend stiffens up. He goes to the closet and pulls out his .22, and I think, oh boy. He opens the door, and he goes around the corner. I hear a gunshot and running. A couple of seconds later, another gunshot, and I hear him say, "Yeah, you better run." I facepalm nervously, but then I hear him scream. My blood freezes in my veins. I'm just about flipping out in response to his scream. I contemplate running outside, but inside my head, I'm fighting it. I don't know what to do. One side's saying, "He's your friend." The other side is saying, "No, it's too dangerous." But I think, screw it, I have to help. So I look outside, and I don't see anything. I look down, and I see blood on the ground from where the gunshot came from. Internally, I'm screaming. Externally, I'm trying to be macho, and I'm failing at it badly. I go around the house again slowly. Damn my curiosity. I see my friend running toward the house, like sprinting. He gives me the gun, and he runs inside. I can see him picking up the phone. I'm assuming he's calling for help. The police arrive rather quickly. I see my friend is now covered in blood. He was explaining to the police what happened. I put my 2 cents in, and they don't know what to make of it. They search the area where he, quote, killed it, but the body isn't there, according to them. They tell us that they'll keep searching around and keep a lookout, but they tell us not to talk about this to anyone. We camp out in the living room until the next morning when his parents come home. I'm not sure what this thing was, but by the way it stood up on its hind legs and walked around was just very weird. I know it wasn't just some wild beast. So this story is not my own. It's something that my friend shared with me, and I thought it was worth sharing. Back when his grandfather was still alive, my friend was about 16 and was going camping with his grandfather near their house. My friend was the typical fat white kid who plays too much video games. He's camped before, but he never needed to learn anything much about the outdoors. But his grandpa, on the other hand, is this badass Native American from the Passamaquoddy tribe. Seriously, his grandfather was super cool. He was a scrappy old guy, but he won many awards for his archery skills. The man was a master with a bow, and also ran various sweat lodges up in Maine, and was very outspoken about Indian casinos and the like. A really cool, old-school gentleman with some great stories and a dry wit. This particular weekend, my grandfather takes him backpacking down near the river near their home. It's about 4 miles along a railroad tracks and then some rocky cliffs to get there. My friend is all excited to camp in the trees, to fish in the river, that sort of thing. They reach this massive sand pit inside what used to be a quarry. The area is low and surrounded by a much higher and denser wooded area. It's tough to climb down into, but easy to get out of. My friend's grandfather says, "We're here." My friend questions his grandfather's choice of location, but he knows that his grandfather knows best, being a wilderness man and all. They set up to camp, but the whole night, his grandfather is tense. While they sit around eating dinner, my friend's grandfather is mostly quiet, watching the fire and staring off into the tree line, almost in a trance. My friend notices that his grandfather is tensely holding on to his bow, which is about an arm's length from his body, leaning against the chair he was sitting in. My friend tries a few times and eventually gets his grandfather's attention. His grandfather shows him some cool things that night, some stuff about playing guitar and whittling. My friend eventually gets tired after a few hours and goes to bed. When he asks his grandfather when he's going to bed, he says he can't because he has to watch the fire. My friend decides to go to bed, and hopefully his grandfather will eventually catch up. A few hours pass, and my friend wakes up to rustling outside the tent. He pokes his head out to find his grandfather still watching the fire and staring at the tree line. "Grandpa, what are you doing? It's past midnight," he says. His grandfather responds, "Watching the fire, son. Go to bed and get yourself some rest. You'll need it." My friend is getting weirded out, but he goes back to sleep and conks out for the night. That next morning, my friend gets up to find his grandfather cooking breakfast over the same fire and whistling happily. He asks when his grandfather went to bed, and his grandfather eerily replies, "When they stopped watching my fire." My friend is creeped out by this and asks his grandfather what he means, but he gets no response. They spend the morning doing man stuff, but that afternoon, his grandfather is hurried and tells my friend to go get some more firewood before dusk. My friend walks out of the sand pit and into the trees to grab some branches. He notices an arrow sticking out of a tree, nearly at head level. When he's finally standing up, he shouts back to his grandfather that he is a crazy old man and comes back down with the firewood and the arrow. The grandfather thanks him and just sort of shyly pockets the arrow. My friend pries, but he gets, again, nothing of an explanation. Both of them get the fire roaring again. Then they eat dinner and go about their night telling stories. My friend asked his grandfather about his heritage, which his grandfather was excited to talk about. He tells my friend the story of there being 2 types of creatures in the world: those who watch the fires to keep them lit, and those who watch fires to put them out. His grandfather follows up by saying that fire brings a lot of good into the world, but there are some beings who don't like that, and they wish to destroy it. When a fire goes out, it's a sign of a bad omen. My friend is still creeped out at this story, but after that he says his grandfather never made reference to it ever again. The night of camping continues as per usual, and my friend goes to bed. His grandfather stays out to watch the fire once again, and my friend just gives up trying to get him to rest. The next morning he wakes up, and just like a horror movie, the fire is out, just smoldering ash. His grandfather is missing. My friend starts panicking and looks all around the campsite. He finds his grandfather's bow is gone, and it's clear that the grandfather scrambled because things that he should have taken, like his boots, were left at the campsite. My friend figures he can go wander up to where he found the arrow the day before and see if his grandfather was just grabbing wood, though he's definitely in panic mode. On his way up the hill to the trees, he sees tracks in the sand, possibly his grandfather's. My friend makes it into the woods and sees a few arrows here and there, most of them buried in the ground and looking like they were fired from the sandpit below. One arrow is clearly stuck in a tree. Where it is struck is a little bit above head level for my friend, about 6 feet at the time, and attached to the head of the arrow is a patch of fur. The tree bears a small patch of what looks like blood around the impact area. My friend starts shitting his pants at this point, wondering if his grandfather was attacked by an animal. My friend then has a moment of strange clarity, which he can't really describe. He said it felt like one of those miraculous moments you hear about on the news, when a parent suddenly can hear their baby crying when they're in danger. He decides to go back to camp and relight the fire to maybe signal to his grandfather. He gets the fire going, smoky and bright, and then throws on his gear to start searching the perimeter of the pit. My friend is shouting his grandfather's name at this point, without any luck. As he's walking the area near where he found the bloody tree, he hears a yelp, almost like an injured animal. This is followed by what he described as one of the nastiest shrieks he had ever heard in his life. He shudders about it just telling the story. My friend turns his head toward the direction of the sound and sees his grandfather sprinting through the trees, barefoot, with his bow, and beelining directly toward the campsite. My friend runs toward him, and his grandfather surprises him with the biggest hug my friend had ever gotten from him. His grandfather thanks him for watching the fire, and then tells them that they need to leave as soon as possible. The two pack up, though his grandfather is clearly slower at this. My friend sees some bruises and cuts on his grandfather's body and asks if he's okay. At this point in telling the story, my friend started to cry and said that his grandfather gave him the biggest, happiest smile he had ever seen in his life. His grandfather reassures him that everything will be fine, and the two of them hike all the way back home. After that, his grandfather was back to his normal self, though my friend and him grew much closer. Until he died, his grandfather only recounted the story with my friend in vague snippets, never really telling my friend what he saw or shot out in the woods. To this day, he swears that he saved his grandfather's life, but he'll never know what it was that was stalking them during that woods trip. And as we got older, whenever we partied or went camping as friends, he was just as diligent about the fire as his grandfather was. Eventually, we made fun of him for it, and that's when he shared the story. When I was 23, I moved to the Great North Woods up in Vermont for a job. It was the first time that I had moved away from home, and I was completely alone. I had roommates in college, so I wasn't living by myself then. So, for me, it was literally this big manly adventure, or it was supposed to be. The town was quite destitute when I got there, as the factory had shut down years ago. Everybody was too poor to leave, though. It was smack on the Quebec border, and so the only employed folks in town either drove an hour across the state line, or they themselves did customs/border control. There was nothing but moose, mountains, woods, and rednecks who had nothing better to do with their time except, quote, get off the grid and hunt. Definitely a pretty wild experience for me. Anyway, I'm not the best at telling stories, but I'll do my best to share this thing I experienced during my time that I lived up there. I was teaching science in this rural K-12 school, and the school was located on top of a plateau overlooking the river, but backed by wooded mountainsides. The town had a real hunting culture, so it was not uncommon for students to come to school with rifles or fresh kills left in their truck beds. One day, a boy comes into my room with a skull stripped clean, with a massive exit wound behind one of its eyes. It was definitely a canine, although we struggled to pare it down to which kind. He told me that he shot it himself when it was caught rummaging through a dumpster behind his house. Then he left it outdoors to naturally decompose and clean. The town had a real problem with night predators. Mostly there were coyotes or bears that would snatch pets from yards when they were left unattended. I asked the kid to describe the animal, thinking myself it was just a coy dog or something, but he said his memory was spotty and he wasn't too sure. I kept the skull in my room, and I just kind of whatever and go on with my day. So fast forward, a few weeks go by, and this same kid shows up with a similar skull, although killed in a different way. Same story as before. He killed it, wasn't sure what it was, and wanted me to have it. It was at this point where I should have said, "That's pretty weird, what's wrong with you?" But I let it go, and I just added it to my collection of weird shit in the classroom. So fast forward again. Now another week passes, and it's the same boy, but this time he turns up with not a skull, but a whole body. After checking it out, I'm quite convinced that it's a fox or just a really unlucky neighborhood dog, and I tell the kid that I'm appreciative, but he needs a new hobby that isn't shooting anything that walks into his yard any given night. So this quote fox isn't really fully decomposed, it still has some fleshy bits, so I take it home to clean it up so I can mount the skeleton. It's getting late, and I'm in my apartment sitting on the deck looking up at the mountains. The fox is tied to a tree branch just off the deck until I figure out what to do with it, and I pay it no mind. Suddenly, I get this whiff of something gross, almost like decay and garbage, coming into the air. The fox wasn't really that rancid, and I had worked with enough dissections, preserved or fresh kills, to know that this was definitely something a lot older than my fox carcass, like a blend of petrified garbage and rotting meat, or maybe spoiled fish. I peer down through the beams on the deck and see a rustling in the trees. I should mention that my apartment was on the second story of an already impressively tall building. The deck, while narrow, was easily about 50 feet off the ground. The building I lived in was the old town prison and courthouse, so it had some impressive architecture and was generally a spacious place to live. I was pretty high up, even just looking from my window, and I could see the majority of downtown, and also the town across the river if I turned my head or had binoculars. Anyways, I don't think anything of the shaking trees, but the smell is gross enough that I move inside, and I close up shop, so to speak, and I get ready to go to bed. I left the fox on the outside of the deck, as the only easy access was either from inside the house or up the fire escape ladder, which itself started a good 6 or so feet off the ground, which I would have to run and jump or use a step stool to climb up. While I'm in bed, I can still smell this acrid odor coming through my windows, which are locked, and I just think, ugh. I burned some incense and I tried to ignore it. Within a short while, what felt like no time, but it was probably more than an hour, the smell persisted and even seemed stronger. I started hearing movement outside, below the house. Sometimes teens would dick around outside my building because it had 2 sides that faced the woods and mountains, rather than town, so they could get away with stuff. Or it was a roommate who was a very noisy person, so I rationalized it and I tried to get back to sleep. The smell is still lingering though, even with the incense burning, and I'm starting to hear this scratching noise on the side of the house. It can't scare me, I just ignore it. I'm safe in my bed and screw the outside world, but the scratching gets closer, and after a few more minutes, the scratching is now clearly outside my window, possibly even on the deck. The smell is so strong I feel like I need to sneeze. I think it has to be some squirrels or weird critters. I will not be fazed by this. Then, there was a rapping on my window. The shades are already down, and the window is locked because my roommate and I didn't trust the local kids not to try to climb onto the deck and screw with us. But this rapping was very clearly not a knock. It was like a dog or some other animal smacking the door to be let inside. I'm starting to get scared, wondering if there's something outside my bedroom window. I decide to move to the living room because it seemed safer. I can't hear the rapping or smell anything anymore. So, eventually I pass out for the night. The next day, I wake up incredibly late, which I remember because it was actually like 1 p.m. and my roommate was already cooking lunch. I apologized for hogging the couch and head back to my room. The shade is up completely. My window's still locked, but something seems off about it. I try to budge the window, and it opens right up, even with the locks. I think, oh shit, that locks don't work on this window. I step onto the deck and the smell is gone. There's no signs of forced entry or anything, but the fox carcass is missing. It's just gone. The rope is still hanging from the tree. But then I find the skulls that I had in my classroom neatly placed near my window, just out of sight, that I would have had to walk out on the deck to see them. I have no idea how they got there, because I was one of the last people to leave school, and the classroom was locked tight each night. Later that day, I take both skulls and I chuck them as far away from my apartment as they possibly can be. It's pretty much a rocky ravine, and I can see one of them chip as it tumbles. I tell my roommate the story and she's laughing because she doesn't believe one word of it. I know that I'm not crazy. The next day at school, I asked the student if he knew anything, figuring maybe that he was getting back at me, and the whole thing was all a setup. The kid bursts into tears, but he doesn't admit any wrongdoing. He tells me that he didn't kill the animals with the skulls, but he found them on his back porch, waiting for him in the morning every day until he finally gave them to me. The fox, though, he did kill, and he was trying to use it as bait for whatever was leaving the skulls, but no luck. I'm dumbfounded. I'm still convinced that the kid's screwing with me. Eventually, I more or less move on, and for weeks, I hear or see nothing. Summer rolls around, and my roommate is complaining about the garbage being heavy. I take it down to the dump, and we end up dropping the bag at some point. It rips, and one of the canine skulls literally rolls out. I kick the thing and nope out right there. Over the next few days, some weird things start to happen. People's dogs start following me in the park whenever I go for a run. Some of them even follow me home. The superintendent hits a small dog with his car and brings it to me after school to check it out, which he was super creepy about. My typically vegetarian roommate kept spending her nights somewhere else and started stocking our fridge with red meat that I never saw her eat, but it was always being replaced. One day, I went for a hike and the same coyote crossed my path 3 times before sitting down and letting me walk past it. And at the coffee shop, I mysteriously got nicknamed Dog, even though I never personally knew the owners. I even had an older couple, one of whom I worked with, invite me over late at night to drink, and when I left, they started growling at me and acting really weird. I still wasn't connecting the dots, but the thing that irked me the most and convinced me that I had to get the hell out more than anything was when I got home one night and there was a man waiting for me at the door. He was wearing a heavy hooded raincoat, even though it was clear skies, and he looked unkempt and disheveled. I had never seen him or met him before, but he asked me if I was using my grill to cook anything because he had some meat he needed to cook. He then immediately held up a fresh killed rabbit, his hands covered in blood. I politely told him to buzz off and went into my house. And on that night, I heard howling all night, non-stop howling. It never ended. The next morning, the lights outside my building were all smashed in, and we found dead dogs just a few yards away from the apartment. I reported it, but I never heard anything from the police or anyone since. Needless to say, I moved out of that town within a month after the howling. I got a new job in a different state, which was nice, but I have no idea what the deal was with this place. I want to go back just to see the people I knew there, but the town still gives me the creeps just thinking back about it and everything that happened there. So, what'd you think of those stories? Let me know down in the comments which one was your favorite one. Do you have a story of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. I also have links to a PayPal and a Patreon if you wanted to donate to the channel, and some other stuff's down there too, I guess. And I don't usually talk about, what I think the stories were, all that stuff, and there are various reasons for that, but in this case, I think I might. I had said in the intro that I thought that one of them was a Dogman, and the reason why is because I thought it kind of fit the description, and there seemed to be some form of intelligence behind whatever was chasing them. Like it was more taunting them, like a human would, I guess. I don't know. That's just a thought I had. But yeah, let me know what you guys all thought down in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.